My name is Susan Snow. I am the daughter of a Los Angeles police detective who was ambushed and murdered on Halloween night of 1985 when I was 17 years old. My dad and I had a very close relationship. The best thing I remember about him was the fact that he was present. When he was with you, you felt like you were the most important thing in that room, and he didn't let anything else distract him, especially with his kids. He was our protector. When he became a detective, though, he was no longer on the street, and I had a false sense of security. I felt like since he wasn't on the street anymore and he was more on a desk and he was investigating being a robbery homicide detective, that it was after the fact, and so that he wasn't in danger any longer. My dad and I, we did a lot together, actually. He liked to go fishing. It wasn't my favorite, but I loved spending time with him. Those were the days that I really cherished, and even sitting down, we used to watch TV together. He liked Miami Vice. Shocker. I was about 15 years old. I was walking home from school one day, and this man pulled up in a car, and he was waving a piece of paper at me. My dad had taught me all of the rules of staying safe and knowing your environment and what to do if someone was trying to hurt you. So I didn't want to go anywhere near the car, but he kept waving this piece of paper and asking me for directions. So I thought that I would be safe if I just took 2 steps towards the car. What I didn't know is the man was doing something inappropriate, and he reached through the window of the car door and tried to grab me. And immediately I remembered it was like having my dad sitting on my shoulder. I remember running all the way home, and what was being said in my head was, "Don't go home. Go to the neighbor's house." That's what I did. And when I got to the neighbor's house, I pounded on her door. I didn't know if the guy was behind me or not. I wasn't gonna look. So I pounded on her door until she thought I was crazy and let me in the door. And I immediately went and called my dad, and I told him what happened. That night he came home and he said, "We're getting in the car and we're gonna drive around. You're gonna tell me what kind of car it was." I was like, at that point, when something like that happens, you just want to kind of let it go. But my dad was like, "Oh no, this guy isn't getting away with it." So he drove me around. I found the type of car. He took notes. And then the next day he came to me and said, "You're going to the sketch artist and we're going to sketch out what this guy looked like. I'm putting an alert out for him." And that's what happened. Now, I don't know if the guy was apprehended or not, but that was the extreme story of how my dad would protect me. When I started dating, I was really apprehensive. Obviously, the joke is that your dad's going to clean his gun when a boy comes to pick me up or something, which never happened. But he trusted me, and we had many conversations about dating and being safe while dating and that kind of thing. I think one story was there was a guy that was visiting a neighbor, and it was the summertime. I was 16 at the time, and I met this guy, and we started dating. He was underage. He was 19 years old, and I was 16. Before this guy left to go back home, wherever he was from, he wanted to meet my dad because he wanted to take me out to dinner or something, and my dad was home, so he thought he would go over there and introduce himself. Well, this guy thought he was smart, and he brought my dad a beer, and my dad's first reaction was, "Aren't you underage?" So it kind of backfired on the guy. Not to mention, he had a full mustache, and my dad was just like, "Oh no." So basically I had the conversation of, "You will not date boys older than you." But we laughed about it. I saw my dad struggle with some of his cases and frustrations with things. I think the funniest part is about the compartmentalizing. Sometimes they don't, especially detectives, they don't realize like the things that they're saying to you are not normal. So for instance, my dad, we would be sitting around the dinner table or having dinner, and he would be describing the dead guy that he just found that was like 2 days old or whatever. I'd have to say, Dad, ew. I'm trying to eat. But for him, it's his job. And that was a conversation that he would have, with his coworkers or whatever. And so sometimes he wouldn't catch himself. For him, he was just like telling you about his day. I don't think my dad ever had that kind of situation happen. But I know that he did patrol down in the Watts area, and the gang situation down there wasn't great. But again, I think I was so young at the time that I just didn't even realize the danger. I remember him telling me one story that just broke my heart, and it was when I was a baby and he was on the street. There was a lady who was drugged up on, and she thought her baby was the devil, so she was stomping on it. My dad and his partner arrived, and I think some other officers arrived, and they were trying to stop her. And my dad scooped up the baby, put it in the car, and took it to the hospital. I think that was really traumatic for him. I remember my mom telling me that he just came home and he scooped me up. I was fast asleep, but he didn't care. He just wanted to hold his baby. One thing I can say is that I don't think that there has ever been as much support for officers. And my dad spoke to me about this, and it was a frustration of the fact that if an officer sought out help, they were chastised by their coworkers. They were made to feel like they were weak. On October 31st, 1985, I was 17. I wanted to go to a party that night. In the morning of that day, my dad was going to testify, and he was testifying in a case that he was the lead detective in, and the defendant was out on bail during his trial. That morning, my dad was acting really different. He didn't really care about what he looked like. But that day, for some reason, he was very animate about looking a certain way. So I thought, well, if I help Dad get ready for court, he'll let me go to this party. That morning, it was pretty normal. We went into the car. He took me to school. He dropped me off. The plan was that my dad was going to get off his court day and go to the school where my brother goes to school and pick him up. And my brother was 6. My mom came home, and she was getting out of her Tin Man costume and kind of telling me about her day. She went into another room and was continuing to take her makeup off. The phone rang, and I sprinted across the room to pick up the phone because being a teenager, I was the only one that was going to get that, get a phone call. I picked up the phone, and it wasn't for me. It was a lady from my brother's school. And all she said to me was that there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved, and that was it. And immediately I just handed the phone to my mom, and I could kind of hear a little bit of the conversation, but I watched my mom's demeanor change. I watched her posture change, and she hung up the phone and she looked at me and she said, "We're going to the school." And I said, okay. We got in the car, and neither one of us spoke. I just had this deep pit in my stomach. I knew it was bad. I didn't know how bad. I didn't know what we were going to see or anything. Got to the school. It was about 5 minutes. Got to the school, parked the car, and the kids got picked up on the backside of the school. That's where we headed. When we got out there, all we saw were an ambulance, there were police cars, there were policemen who were walking around, and they had tears in their eyes. And we turned and we could see my dad's truck. So my mom and I started to walk briskly towards the truck. And that's when we saw my dad's body. It was covered up in a white sheet, but you could still see a little bit of him. We could see the glass all over the street. My mom ran, and an officer grabbed her arm and tried to hold her back, and she just dropped to her knees. And I just stood there, and I didn't know how to comprehend what I was looking at. The officers that were on scene, they took us back to the office. My mom got pulled away, I believe, by some detectives. I didn't know where my brother was. I just sat there in the office by myself. I could overhear two of the ladies from the school, and they were talking, because my thought process at the time is I saw an ambulance, and I couldn't understand why they weren't helping him, because it wasn't connecting that he was gone. And these two women were talking, and the one woman said to the other one that Mr. Williams is deceased. It just snapped in my head. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to run, physically run out of there, but my legs weren't working anymore. Like, I just sat in that chair and I didn't know what to do. And my mom came to me and she said, I'm sending you with a neighbor. And I begged for my neighbor to call my boyfriend at the time. And I had her call him at work and have him come to the house. And I couldn't speak. I was hysterical. I wanted to get out of this nightmare. I didn't know how to function. And he showed up not knowing. And so he came to the door and he said, grab your jacket, I'm taking you to the hospital. The words couldn't come out of my mouth. I stood there and I said, you don't understand. And he's like, no, let's go. What hospital? Where's your mom? Let's just go. And I said, we can't go. And I didn't want to say the words because then it was real, but I ended up blurting them out. And I said, he's gone. And my boyfriend dropped to his knees and we both sat and sobbed together. When I was able to go home, what was kind of crazy and added to a lot of anxiety was that my quiet street was filled with police officers and there were helicopters overhead. It was just crazy. My boyfriend and he walked me home. I didn't know if I could go home or not, but I wanted to go home at that point. So we walked, it was about 3 doors up and my driveway was filled with cars. I walked into my house. My house was packed full of people that I did not know. And my mom, I could hear her kind of in the background talking, but I just kind of made a beeline for my room. I just wanted to hide. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, the officers were still there, and I didn't know. This was just a totally different world for me. I went from being a normal teenage girl to having this craziness around me, and I didn't know how to navigate that feeling. I didn't know, my mom was kind of in her own world, dealing with her own grief and her own trauma, and I was just not able, being a kid myself, I didn't know how to feel about any of this. And unfortunately, because it happened in front of my brother and my dad saved his life by telling him to duck down in the truck, the media, immediately all the focus was on him. And so be it. He's a child. He was a little child and my mom. And so the focus was on the both of them and I got kind of pushed to the side. So in the beginning, I just felt like I was kind of on my own. They didn't catch him for 6 days, the men that were involved. So this was my life for 6 days. I had at least 20 officers in the front of my house and probably 10 to 20 in the back side of my house every single day for 6 days. If I had to go anywhere, we had bodyguards. So that night, what happened was he left court and he went to my brother's school and he parked his truck in the back of the school where they would pick up the children. He went inside and my brother's school did not believe in Halloween, so they were all dressed like pilgrims. So he went in there and he picked up my brother, and as they were walking towards my dad's truck, my dad saw a gun muzzle sticking out of a car. And I don't know if he knew what was about to happen clearly, but what I do know is that my brother was in the car or in the truck already. He told my brother to duck down in the truck. And that's when the assailant drove by and killed him with a MAC-10. And so the bullets sprayed everywhere. And thank God no kids were hurt or killed. But my brother at that point, and I know this because he's told me, he got out of the truck and he rounded the truck and went to my dad. And was by his side when somebody came, a teacher, I believe, came and scooped him up and called the police. So that's all I know about that part. I do know that my dad was killed instantly. It's an automatic weapon, so the bullets spray everywhere. So the man that he had investigated the original case, that man had a robbery ring, and he used a limousine service as his cover company. Well, I knew it was him. I could see a little sliver of his hair, and there was a little bit of wind that night, so I could see his hair kind of blowing in the wind, and I recognized his shoes, so I knew it was him who was wearing the suit that I helped him get ready that morning. So I knew it was him. But like I said, it was a Mac 10, so the damage to the truck, there were bullet holes in the truck and the window. There was glass on the ground. I think that was, the most important, and we were whisked away pretty quick. We didn't get to see a lot after that. Back then, there was no talk about PTSD. There definitely wasn't any conversation around mental health, and I 100% had PTSD symptoms. Immediately afterwards, the depression really sunk in, the longing to be with my dad in any way possible. I walked around in a complete fog for a long time, just trying to navigate life as a senior in high school, and that was significant for me. I really worked on pretending that I was okay when I wasn't, and I wanted to die. I wanted to be with my dad. I didn't have a great relationship with my mom at the time. He'd always been kind of our mediator in between person, and now he was gone, and I didn't know how to function as a daughter. I didn't know how to function as a sister. I really struggled with my mental health. About a month after, LAPD told my mom that they were going to pay for us, all of us, her, myself, and my brother, to go to therapy. And at the time, I just thought a therapist was for people who were crazy. And so I had no idea what mental health was, for one. So I just did what the adults told me to do, which was go to this therapist. And I met with this gentleman. At the time, I had suicidal ideation. I was having panic attacks all the time because my security was gone, and I wasn't sleeping at night. I was just a mess. And this guy, in hindsight, I feel like maybe he wasn't educated enough to handle the amount of trauma at the time. So our sessions from the very beginning were very shallow. So after an entire year of seeing him, he looked at me and he said, "Susan, you're a well-rounded young lady, and you're strong, and you're going to be fine for the rest of your life. I don't have to see you anymore." And I thought to myself, wait, what? I still have all this stuff swirling around in my head, and I don't know how to get rid of it. I don't know how to fix this. And you're telling me I'm fine. So my mindset at that point was, okay, well, I guess you're just broken and you're crazy, and this is just how you're going to be for the rest of your life. You're just going to have to live with it. So that's what I did. And I lived in fight or flight for a very long time, 14 years to be exact. I went through all of the normal things that you're supposed to do, like getting married and having children and, the things that I was expected to do. And I married that boyfriend that was with me from the beginning. And now I'm married. I have 2 kids. I'm a hairdresser at the time. I'm working. It's April of 1999. Columbine happens, the Columbine shootings. And I was working. I put my client under a dryer, and I went into the back, and we had this tiny little TV set in our break room. So I popped it on, and I stood there and I watched the coverage, and something was happening, and I couldn't understand what it was. I started having flashbacks of the night my dad was killed. I saw the teenagers that were filing out of the school, and they were my same age that I was when my dad was killed. I saw the police officers, the ambulances, all of these things. And then anxiety started just going through my body, and I started shaking, and I turned pale white, and my coworkers didn't know my story. So they were asking me, what is going on with you? Do you have children there? Do you live in the neighborhood? Is that your community? What is going on? And I said, I have no idea what's happening right now, because I didn't. Remember, that therapist told me I was going to be fine for the rest of my life, and I wasn't. I did what I was always able to do, was putting on my mask, that I was fine, and this was going to go away. And I left that day, and as I walked out that door, all of those old feelings started flooding back. The depression, the suicidal ideation. I started having fantasies of driving off this, into a tree or off the road or whatever. And I did this for 4 days. My husband watched me spiral. And now I'm a mom. So I'm spiraling and I'm having to function as a mom at the same time. And my husband finally one day, on the fourth day, he met me at the door and he said, you have two choices. You either get help or I'm putting you in a hospital. And so being a mom, I just was like, I got to do something. This is scaring me. I don't know how to manage this. I don't know how to navigate this. I feel out of control. So I did. I went to the doctor and the doctor put me on antidepressants. And then he said, and you need to seek a therapist. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. Like, that didn't help me 14 years ago. What makes you think it's going to happen now? And he said, well, here's the name of somebody and this person should be able to help you. And I am very grateful for that reference, because the woman that I did see specialized in PTSD. Currently, I'm a mom of adult children now. I'm a new author. I decided that once I had done all the work that I needed to do for my mental health, that I needed to tell my story. And so at 50 years old, I decided, and it took me 4.5 years to write it because I had to dive and relive everything all over again. But I found my purpose in it, and I realized that I could help other people. So I sat down for 4.5 years and I wrote my book. The Other Side of the Gun was born out of the idea that people can read my words and connect with me in some sort of way, and that would be able to help them find hope